Beowulf, chapter 25. And then pride grows in his heart, planted quietly but flourishing, and while the keeper of his soul sleeps on, while conscience rests and the world turns faster, a murderer creeps closer, comes carrying a tight-strung bow with terrible arrows. And those sharp points strike home, are shot in his breast, under his helmet. He's helpless. And so the devil's dark urgings wound him, for he can't remember how he clung to the rotting wealth of this world, how he clawed to keep it, how he earned no honor, no glory, in giving golden rings, how he forgot the future glory God gave him at his birth, and forgetting did not care. And finally his body fails him. These bones and flesh quickened by God fall and die, and some other soul inherits his place in heaven, some open-handed giver of old treasures, who takes no delight in mere gold. Guard against such wickedness, beloved Beowulf, best of warriors, and choose, instead, eternal happiness. Push away pride. Your strength, your power, are yours for how many years? Soon you'll return them where they came from. Sickness or a sword's edge will end them, or a grasping fire, or the flight of a spear, or surging waves, or a knife's bite, or the terror of old age, or your eyes darkening over. It will come. Death comes faster than you think. No one can flee it. So I have led the Danes for 50 years, protected them from all peoples on this earth, my sword and my spear so ready that no one anywhere under God's high sun was eager to wage war here in Denmark. And here too the change has come. And we wept for our dead when Grendel invaded Heorot. My enemy raided this hall. My sorrow, my grief, was as great and lasting as it was helpless. Then, thanks be given to God, eternal Lord to us all, you came, and that endless misery was over, and I lived, now, to behold this bloody head. Go in, feast, be as happy as your fame deserves. When morning shines, we shall each have owned more of my treasures. Beowulf obeyed him, entered Heorot cheerfully, and took his place at the table. And once again Danes and Geats feasted together, a host of famous warriors in a single hall. Then the web of darkness fell, and it was night. They rose. Hrothgar, the gray-haired old Dane, was heavy with sleep, and Beowulf was glad that a bed was waiting, the bravest of warriors exhausted with the work he'd done. A Danish servant showed him the road to that far-off, quiet country where sleep would come, and take him and his followers. Hrothgar's visitors were well cared for. Whatever they needed was theirs. Then Beowulf rested. Heorot rose high above him, gleaming in the darkness. The Geats slept till a black-feathered raven sang his cheerful song, and the shining sun burned away shadows. And those seafarers hurried from their beds, anxious to begin the voyage home, ready to start, their hearts already sailing on a ship's swift back. Then Unferth came, with Hrunting, his famous sword, and offered it to Beowulf, asked him to accept a precious gift. The prince took it, thanked him, and declared the weapon one he was proud to own. His words blamed it for nothing, were spoken like the hero he was. The war gear was ready. The Geats were armored and eager to be gone. Quickly Beowulf sought Hrothgar's throne, where the king sat waiting for his famous visitor's farewell. Chapter 26. Beowulf spoke. We crossed the sea to come here. It is time to return, to go back to our beloved lord, Hygelac. Denmark was a gracious host. He welcomed us warmly. Anything I can do, here on this earth, to earn your love, O great king. Anything more than I have done. Battles I can fight in your honor. Summon me. I will come as I came once before. If I hear, from across the ocean, that your neighbors have threatened you with war, or oppressed you as enemies once oppressed you, here, I will bring 1,000 warriors, 1,000 armed Geats to protect your throne. I trust Hygelac. Our king is young, but if I need his help, to better help you, to lend you our strength, our battle-sharp spears, to shield you and honor you as you deserve, I know his words and his deeds will support me. And some day, if your oldest son, Hrethric, comes visiting our court, he will find a host of good friends among the Geats. No one who goes visiting far-off lands is more welcome than a strong and noble warrior. Hrothgar replied, All-knowing God must have sent you such words. Nothing so wise from a warrior so young has ever reached these ancient ears. Your hands are strong, your heart and your lips are knowing. If your lord Hrethrul's son is slain by a spear, or falls sick and dies, or is killed by a sword, and you have survived whatever battle sweeps him off. I say that the Geats could do no better, find no man better suited to be king, keeper of warriors and their treasure, than you. If you take the throne, they will surely offer you. Beloved Beowulf, you please me more the longer I can keep you here in Denmark. You've turned Danes and Geats into brothers, brought peace where once there was war, and sealed friendship with affection. This will last as long as I live, and am king here. We shall share our treasures, greeting travelers from across the sea with outstretched hands. Ring-browed ships will carry our gifts, and the tokens of our love. Your people live by the old ways. Their hearts, like ours, are forever open to their friends, but firmly closed against their enemies. Then he gave the Geats prince a dozen new gifts, prayed for his safety, commanded him to seek his people, yet not to delay too long in visiting Hrothgar once more. The old king kissed him, held that best of all warriors by the shoulder, and wept, unable to hold back his tears. Grey and wise, he knew how slim were his chances of ever greeting Beowulf again. But seeing his face, he was forced to hope. His love was too warm to be hidden. His tears came running too quickly to be checked. His very blood burned with longing. And then Beowulf left him, left Heorot, walked across the green in his golden armor, exulting in the treasures heaped high in his arms. His ship was at anchor. He had it ready to sail, and so Hrothgar's rich treasures would leave him, travel far from the perfect king, without fault or blame until winter had followed winter, and age had stolen his strength, spirited off, as it steals from many men. Chapter 27. Then the band of Geats, young and brave, marching in their ring-locked armor, reached the shore. The coast guard saw them coming, and about to go, as he'd seen them before. He hurried down the hillside, whipping his horse, but this time shouted no challenge, told them only how the Geats would be watching too, and would welcome such warriors in shining mail. Their broad-beamed ship lay bobbing at the edge of the sand. They loaded it high with armor and horses and all the rich treasure it could hold. The mast stood high and straight over heaped up with wealth, Hrothgar's and now theirs. Beowulf rewarded the boat's watchman, who had stayed behind, with a sword that had hammered gold wound on its handle. The weapon brought him honor. Then the ship left shore, left Denmark, traveled through deep water. Deck timbers creaked, and the wind billowing through the sail stretched from the mast, tied tight with ropes, did not hold them back, did not keep the ring-proud ship from foaming swiftly through the waves, the sea currents, across the wide ocean until they could see familiar headlands, cliffs that sprang out of Geatish soil. Driven by the wind, the ship rammed high on the shore. Harbor guards came running to greet them, men who for days had waited and watched for their beloved comrades to come crossing the waves. They anchored the high-bowed ship, moored it close to the shore, where the booming sea could not pull it loose and lead it away. Then they carried up the golden armor, the ancient swords, the jewels, brought them to Higlac's home, their ring-giver's hall, near the sea, where he lived surrounded by his followers. He was a famous king, with a fitting high hall and a wife, Hygd, young but wise and knowing beyond her years. She was Hereth's daughter, a noble queen with none of the niggardly ways of women like Thrith. Hygd gave the Geats gifts with open hands, but Thrith was too proud, an imperious princess with a vicious tongue, and so fierce and wild that her father's followers averted their eyes as she passed, knowing that if anyone but their king watched where she walked, her hands would shape a noose to fit their necks. She would lie, her father's lieutenants would write out her warrants, and he who had stared would end his life on the edge of an ancient sword. And how great a sin for a woman, whether fair or black, to create fear and destruction. For a woman who should walk in the ways of peace, to kill with pretended insults. But Hemming's kinsmen tamed her. His hall guests told a different story, spread the news that Thrith had forgotten her gory tricks. Once her wise father had sent her to a wedding with Offa, married her to that brave young soldier, sent her across the yellow-green sea to that gold-adorned champion, a fierce fighter in war or peace. They praised her, now, for her generous heart, and her goodness, and the high and most noble paths she walked, filled with adoring love for that leader of warriors, her husband. He was a man as brave and strong and good, it is said, as anyone on this earth, a spear-bold soldier who knew no fear, exalted with gifts, victorious in war, a king who ruled his native land, wisely and well. Emer was his son, Hemming's kinsman, Garmund's grandson, a powerful swordsman and his warrior's shield. Chapter 28. Then Beowulf and his men went walking along the shore, down the broad strip of sand. The world's bright candle shone, hurrying up from the south. It was a short journey from their ship to Hygelac's home, to the hall where their king, Ongentheo's killer, lived with his warriors and gave treasures away. They walked quickly. The young king knew they were back, Beowulf and his handful of brave men, come safely home. He sat now, waiting to see them, to greet his battle comrades when they arrived at his court. They came, and when Beowulf had bowed to his lord, and standing in front of the throne had solemnly spoke loyal words, Hygelac ordered him to sit at his side. He who had survived sailed home victorious, next to his kinsman and king. Mead cups were filled, and Hareth's daughter took them through the hall, carried ale to her husband's comrades. Hygelac, unable to stay silent, anxious to know how Beowulf's adventure had gone, began to question him, courteous but eager to be told everything. "Beloved Beowulf, tell us what your trip to far-off places brought you, your sudden expedition on the salty waves, your search for the war on Heret. Did you end Hrothgar's hopeless misery? Could you help that glorious king? Grendel's savagery lay heavy on my heart, but I was afraid to let you go to him. For a long time I held you here, kept you safe, forced you to make the Danes fight their own battles. God be praised that my eyes have beheld you once more, unharmed." Beowulf spoke, Egetho's brave son. "My lord Hygelac, my meeting with Grendel and the night-time battle we fought are known to everyone in Denmark, where the monster was once the uncrowned ruler, murdering and eating Hrothgar's people, forever bringing them misery. I ended his reign, avenged his crimes so completely in the crashing darkness, that not even the oldest of his evil kind will ever boast, lying in sin and deceit, that the monster beat me. I sought out Hrothgar first, came to him in his hall. When Healfdene's famous son heard that I had come to challenge Grendel, he gave me a seat of honor alongside his son. His followers were drinking. I joined their feast, sat with that band, as bright and loud-tongued as any I've ever seen. His famous queen went back and forth, hurrying the cup-bearing boys, giving bracelets and rings to her husband's warriors. I heard the oldest soldiers of all calling for ale from Hrothgar's daughter's hands. And Freya was the way they greeted her when she gave them golden cups. And Hrothgar will give her the Ingeld, gracious Froda's son. She and that ripening soldier will be married. The Danes' great lord and protector has declared, hoping that his quarrel with the Hathabords can be settled by a woman. He's wrong. How many wars have been put to rest in a prince's bed? Few. A bride can bring a little peace, make spears silent for a time, but not long. Ingeld and all his men will be drinking in the hall when the wedding is done and Freya is his wife. The Danes will be wearing gleaming armor and ring-marked old swords, and the prince and his people will remember these treasures, will remember that their fathers once wore them, fell with those helmets on their heads, those swords in their hands. Chapter 29. And seeing their ancestral armor and weapons, Ingeld and his followers will be angry. And one of his soldiers, sitting with ale in his cup and bitterness heavy in his heart, will remember war and death. And while he sits and drinks, his sharp old tongue will begin to tempt some younger warrior, pushing and probing for a new war. "That sword, that precious old blade over there, I think you know it, friend. Your father carried it, fought with it the last time he could swing a sword. The Danes killed him, and many more of our men, and stripped the dead bodies, the brave, bold Danes. One of the princess's people here, now, might be the murderer's son, boasting about his treasures, his ancient armor, which ought to be yours by right. Bitter words will work in a hot-tempered brain, pushing up thoughts of the past, and then, when he can, calling his father's name, the youngster will kill some innocent Dane. A servant, a bloody sword in hand, will run from the hall, knowing his way through the woods. But war will begin as he runs, to the sound of broken oaths, and its heat will dry up Ingeld's heart, leave him indifferent to his Danish bride. Hrothgar may think the Hathabords love him, loving Freya, but the friendship can't last. The vows are worthless. But of Grendel, you need to know more to know everything. I ought to go on. It was early in the evening. Heaven's jewel had slid to its rest, and the jealous monster, planning murder, came seeking us out, stalking us as we guarded Hrothgar's hall. Honshu, sleeping in his armor, was the first Geat he reached. Grendel seized him, tore him apart, swallowed him down, feet and all, as fate had decreed, a glorious young soldier killed in his prime. Yet Grendel had only begun his bloody work, meant to leave us with his belly and his pouch both full, and Heorot half empty. Then he tested his strength against mine. Hand to hand, his pouch hung at his side, a huge bag sewn from a dragon's skin, worked with the devil's skill. It was closed by a marvelous clasp. The monster intended to take me, put me inside, save me for another meal. He was bold and strong, but once I stood on my feet his strength was useless, and it failed him. Chapter 30. The whole tale of how I killed him, repaid him in kind for all the evil he'd done, would take too long. Your people, my prince, were honored in the doing. He escaped, found a few minutes of life, but his hand, his whole right arm, stayed in Heorot. The miserable creature crept away, dropped to the bottom of his lake, half dead as he fell. When the sun had returned, the Danes' great king poured out treasure, repaid me in hammered gold for the bloody battle I'd fought in his name. He ordered a feast. There were songs and the telling of tales. One ancient Dane told of long-dead times, and sometimes Hrothgar himself, with a harp in his lap, stroked its silvery strings and told wonderful stories, a brave king reciting unhappy truths about good and evil. And sometimes he wove his stories on the mournful thread of old age, remembering buried strength and the battles it had won. He would weep of the old king, wise with many winters, remembering what he'd done once, what he'd seen, what he knew. And so we sat the day away, feasting. Then darkness fell again, and Grendel's mother was waiting, ready for revenge, hating the Danes for her son's death. The monstrous hag succeeded, burst boldly into Heorot, and killed Esher, one of the king's oldest and wisest soldiers. But when the sun shone once more, the death-weary Danes could not build a pyre and burn his beloved body, lay him on flaming logs, return ashes to dust. She'd carried away his corpse, brought it to her den deep in the water. Hrothgar had wept for many of his men, but this time his heart melted. This was the worst. He begged me, in your name, half weeping, as he spoke, to seek still greater glory, deep in the swirling waves, to win still higher fame, and the gifts he would give me. Down in that surging lake I sought and found her, the horrible hag. Fierce and wild we fought, clutching and grasping. The water ran red with blood, and at last, with the mighty sword that hung on the wall himself, I cut off her head. I had barely escaped with my life. My death was not written, and the Danes' protector, Healfdene's great son, heaped up treasures and precious jewels to reward me. Chapter 31. He lived his life as a good king must. I lost nothing, none of the gifts my strength could have earned me. He opened his store of gems and armor, let me choose as I liked, so I could bring his riches to you, my ruler, and prove his friendship, and my love. Your favor still governs my life. I have almost no family, Hygelac, almost no one, now, but you. Then Beowulf ordered them to bring in the boar-head banner, the towering helmet, the ancient silvery armor, and the gold-carved sword. This war-gear was Hrothgar's reward, my gift from his wise old hands. He wanted me to tell you first whose treasures these were. Hrothgar had owned them, his older brother, who was king of Denmark until death gave Hrothgar the throne. But Hrothgar kept them, would not give them to Hereward, his brave young son, though the boy had proved his loyalty. These are yours. May they serve you well. And after the gleaming armor 4 horses were led in, 4 bays, swift and all alike. Beowulf had brought his king horses and treasure, as a man must, not weaving nets of malice for his comrades, preparing their death in the dark with secret cunning tricks. Hygelac trusted his nephew, leaned on his strength and war, each of them intent on the other's joy. And Beowulf gave Wealhtheow's gift, her wonderful necklace, to Hygd, Hygelac's queen, and gave her also 3 supple, graceful, saddle-bright horses. She received his presents, then wore that wonderful jewel on her breast. So Egetho's son proved himself, did as a famous soldier must do if glory is what he seeks, not killing his comrades in drunken rages, his heart not savage, but guarding God's gracious gift, his strength, using it only in war, and then using it bravely. And yet as a boy he was scorned. The Geats considered him worthless. When he sat in their mead hall, and their lord was making men rich, he held no claim on the king's goodwill. They were sure he was lazy, noble but slow. The world spun round. He was a warrior more famous than any, and all the insults were wiped out. Then Hygelac, protector of his people, brought in his father's, Beowulf's grandfather's, great sword, worked in gold. None of the Geats could boast of a better weapon. He laid it in Beowulf's lap, then gave him 7,000 hides of land, houses and ground and all. Geatland was home for both king and prince. Their fathers had left them buildings and fields, but Hygelac's inheritance stretched further. It was he who was king and was followed. Afterwards, in the time when Hygelac was dead, and Hergered, his son, who ruled the Geats after his father, had followed him into darkness, killed in battle with the Swedes, who smashed his shield, cut through the soldiers surrounding their king. Then, when Hyg's one son was gone, Beowulf ruled in Geatland, took the throne he'd refused once, and held it long and well. He was old with years and wisdom, 50 winters a king, when a dragon awoke from its darkness, and dreams and brought terror to his people. The beast had slept in a huge stone tower, with the hidden path beneath. A man stumbled on the entrance, went in, discovered the ancient treasure, the pagan jewels and gold the dragon had been guarding, and, dazzled and greedy, stole a gem-studded cup and fled. But now the dragon hid nothing, neither the theft nor itself. It swept through the darkness, and all Geatland knew its anger.